The coronavirus pandemic has really impacted our entire world, and yet the gospel of the kingdom shows us that Jesus is in control no matter what happens, no matter what tragic events take place.
Hey, this is Tim Mackey at the Bible Project. This coming weekend begins Christian Holy Week, which goes from Palm Sunday, that's on April 5th, and then through Good Friday, and then to Resurrection Sunday on April 12th. And all around the world, many followers of Jesus will not be gathering to celebrate. The social distancing policies that now define most of our lives make it impossible for us to gather on Resurrection Sunday in the year 2020. And that's really sad. I'm celebrating Jesus' resurrection is, at least for me, and I know for lots of people, it's one of those annual events that really bolsters our faith and our hope in God's love. And so not being able to gather for Palm Sunday and Resurrection Sunday over the next week, we can just add it to the list of so many tragic realities that are unfolding from the coronavirus outbreak. And something struck me this week as I was pondering this. The story told on Palm Sunday is also laced with tragedy, isn't it? As Jesus is riding into Jerusalem and the crowds are celebrating him as the new king of Israel, Jesus, we're told, is sad. He's actually weeping. And it's because he knows that this week he's going to bring God's kingdom on earth as in heaven through suffering and dying. Jesus coming to Jerusalem began a whole series of conflicts with the city leaders that put a huge target on his back. And when he is eventually arrested and put through a sham trial and executed on Good Friday, for Jesus' family and friends, this was the ultimate tragedy. What could be more unfair than the unjust death of an innocent man who loved other people so well? And for the people around Jesus, it surely was just another reminder of how things work in our world, that might makes right, that death is the end for us all. But Jesus saw things differently. He said many times beforehand that his death would actually be the place where God enters into human pain and suffering, allowing it to overwhelm him unto death, so that he could overcome it with the power of his love. And while the resurrection of Jesus does not somehow magically erase or undo the tragedy of suffering and death in our world, it does tell us something very important, that not even tragedy or death can separate us from the love of God. This whole COVID-19 outbreak is truly a tragedy of global proportions. There are so many people sick, so many people dying, and there are so many people that are yet to die. People's lives and livelihoods are turning upside down. And for religious people, this raises, the biggest question of all. Where is God in all of this? And there is no simple answer to that question. But every year, for 2,000 years, followers of Jesus have responded to that question by simply telling the story that begins with Palm Sunday. In our suffering world, followers of Jesus believe that God is to be found in the person of Jesus, riding a donkey into Jerusalem, where he will die alongside us and for us as an act of love. And so this year, let Palm Sunday become a chance to meditate on the character of a God who chose to suffer with the world that he loves so much so that he could rescue it. May God bless you and keep you this week, and may he give you peace as we enter into Holy Week in the year 2020.
There's this beautiful poem. It's in the book of Isaiah.
The city of Jerusalem has just been destroyed by Babylon, a great kingdom in the north. And all of these Jewish people, they've been sent away into exile, but a few remained in the city. And they're left wondering, what just happened? Has our God abandoned us?
Right, because Jerusalem was supposed to be the city where God would reign over the world to bring peace and blessing to everyone.
Now, Isaiah had been saying that Jerusalem's destruction was a mess of Israel's own making. They had turned away from their God, become corrupt, and so their city and their temple were destroyed.
Yeah, everything seems lost.
But the poem goes on. There's a watchman on the city walls, and far out on the hills we see a messenger, and he's running towards the city. He's running and he's shouting, "Good news!" And Isaiah says, "How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news."
Beautiful feet?
Yes, the feet are beautiful because they're carrying a beautiful message.
What's the message?
That despite Jerusalem's destruction, Israel's God still reigns as king, and that God himself is going to one day return to this city, take up his throne, and bring peace.
And the watchmen sing for joy because of the good news that their God still reigns.
Now, in the New Testament, we find this same phrase, the good news. It's the Greek word euangelion, and it's also sometimes translated with the word gospel.
Yeah, so when Christians say, "Do you believe the gospel?" they mean, "Do you believe the news?"
But not just any news. In the Bible, this phrase is always about the announcement of the reign of a new king. And in the New Testament, the Gospels use this phrase to summarize all of Jesus' teachings. They say that he went about proclaiming the good news of God's kingdom.
So Jesus saw himself as the messenger, bringing the news that God reigns.
Yes, but the way that he described God's reign, it surprised everybody. I mean, think, a powerful, successful kingdom. It needs to be strong, able to impose its will, able to defeat its enemies. But Jesus said the greatest person in God's kingdom was the weakest, the one who loves and who serves the poor. And he said that you live under God's reign when you respond to evil by loving your enemies and forgiving them and seeking peace. This is an upside-down kingdom.
Now, Jesus also said that this kingdom was arriving with him.
Yeah, so for example, there's this really interesting story where there's a high-ranking Roman officer, and he comes to Jesus begging him to heal his servant. And he even calls Jesus his Lord, acknowledging that Jesus is his authority. Jesus praises this man for recognizing what no one else yet had, that not only was Jesus announcing God's kingdom, he was the king.
And so the word gets out that this Jewish man from Galilee is talking and acting like he's the king of Israel. He's appointing 12 disciples, which are an image of Israel's 12 tribes. He's healing people, forgiving people their sins.
And all of this so threatened Israel's leaders that they finally decide to have him killed. And Jesus let them.
Yeah, which is a weird thing to do if you're trying to become king.
That's right. But for Jesus, this is what had to happen. Jesus saw the sin and the devastation of his people Israel as just one small part of the entire human condition. How all humanity has rebelled against God, resulting in the tragedy and devastation of our whole world. And so how is God going to bring his reign over such a world? Jesus believed it would be through an act of sacrificial love for his enemies. This is why in the Gospels, Jesus' crucifixion is depicted as his enthronement as the King of the Jews.
Yeah, he receives a crown. He also receives a robe.
He's exalted up, not onto a throne, but onto the cross.
How beautiful are the feet that bring good news.
And the good news now is that Jesus has defeated death and that he reigns as king, that he's dealt with our sin and corruption himself, and that he's conquered it with his life and with his love.
And then Jesus sends his followers to go out and keep announcing this good news of the upside-down kingdom.
And to invite everyone to give their allegiance to him, the king who defeated death with his love.
So let's read about Jesus entering Jerusalem in Luke 19:28 through 48. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead, going up to Jerusalem. As he approached Bethphage and Bethany at the hill called the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you untying it?' say, 'The Lord needs it.'" Those who were sent ahead went and found it just as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, "Why are you untying the colt?" They replied, "The Lord needs it." They brought it to Jesus. threw their cloaks on the colt, and put Jesus on it. As he went along, people spread their cloaks on the road. When he came near the place where the road goes down the Mount of Olives, the whole crowd of disciples began joyfully to praise God in loud voices for all the miracles they had seen. Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord. Peace in heaven and glory in the highest. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, rebuke your disciples." "I tell you," he replied, "if they keep quiet, the stones will cry out." As he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, "If you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another, because you did not recognize the time of God's coming to you." When Jesus entered the temple courts, he began to drive out those who were selling. "It is written," he said to them, "My house will be a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of robbers." Every day he was teaching at the temple, but the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the leaders among the people were trying to kill him. Yet they could not find any way to do it, because all the people hung on his words. The people expected Jesus to bring peace and rule as a king in a way that they could understand. Jesus grieved over this because he knew they would suffer and because he longed for them to see him as the true king through the suffering. Like Jesus, it's okay to grieve over shattered expectations and suffering. Take a moment to think about any grief you're feeling over suffering or shattered expectations. We talked about with some of the Sunday school people the grief over not being able to touch a loved one, to see grandchildren, to spend time with them, to go to church. Jesus is the King, despite the way the world looks right now. So what questions does that bring up for you? What truths can you rely on at this time? Isaiah talked about this time hundreds of years earlier in Isaiah 52:7 through 53:12. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace, who bring good tidings, who proclaim salvation, who say to Zion, "Your God reigns." Listen, your watchmen lift up their voices. Together they shout for joy. When the Lord returns to Zion, they will see it with their eyes. Burst into songs of joy together, you ruins of Jerusalem. For the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord laid bare his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth will see the salvation of our God. Verse 13. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up, highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any human being, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So he will sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told, they will see, and what they have not heard, they will understand. Who has believed our message, and to whom has the arm of the Lord been revealed? He grew up before him like a tender shoot, and like a root out of a dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. He was despised and rejected by mankind, a man of suffering and familiar with pain. Like one from whom people hide their faces, he was despised, and we held him in low esteem. Surely he took up our pain and bore our suffering. Yet we considered him punished by God, stricken by him, and afflicted. But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. We all, like sheep, have gone astray. Each of us has turned to our own way. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By oppression and judgment he was taken away. Yet who of his generation protested? For he was cut off from the land of the living. For the transgression of my people he was punished. He was assigned a grave with the wicked, and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the Lord's will to crush him and cause him to suffer. And though the Lord makes his life an offering for sin, he will see his offspring and prolong his days, and the will of the Lord will prosper in his hand. After he has suffered, he will see the light of life and be satisfied. By his knowledge, my righteous servant will justify many, and he will bear their iniquities. Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. For he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. This passage proclaims that God himself is coming to rescue his people. And this is good news, but it will happen in a surprising way, in a way that they don't expect. God's appointed one, the Messiah, will enter into the suffering and death of our world. There's a lot of suffering and pain going on in our world right now. God enters into our suffering. He experiences it personally and is present with us and all those who suffer. Write down where you see suffering and pain in the world and your community right now. Now pray or speak out loud these same instances again, taking in the truth that God is present in each of those situations and suffers with us. In John 12 through 33, Jesus comes to Jerusalem as king. The next day, the great crowd that had come for the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches and went out to meet him, shouting, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel." Jesus found a young donkey and sat on it, as it is written, "Do not be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt." At first, his disciples did not understand all this. Only after Jesus was glorified did they realize that these things had been written about him, and that these things had been done to him. Now the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to spread the word. Many people, because they had heard that he had performed this sign, went out to meet him. So the Pharisees said to one another, "See, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him." Now there was some Greeks among those who went up to worship at the festival. They came to Philip, who was from Bethsaida in Galilee, with a request. "Sir," they said, "we would like to see Jesus." Philip went to tell Andrew. Andrew and Philip in turn told Jesus. Jesus replied, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Very truly I tell you, unless a kernel of wheat falls to the ground and dies, it remains only a single seed. But if it dies, it produces many seeds. Anyone who loves their life will lose it, while anyone who hates their life in this world will keep it for eternal life." Whoever serves me must follow me, and where I am, my servant will also be. My Father will honor the one who serves me. Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it, and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there and heard it said it had thundered. Others said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus said, "This voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out. And I, when I'm lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself." He said this to show the kind of death he was going to die. For Jesus, his suffering was the way God's power and love should be shown to the world. The cross shows us that God's ultimate response to human death and suffering was love. To die alongside us and for us, and to overcome death with his resurrection life. This is Jesus' upside down kingdom. What kinds of things is Jesus doing for others in this passage? Jesus calls his followers to do what he does. In what ways specifically can you suffer alongside others or serve and love others? Thank you for joining me for Sunday school this morning.